Hello, I'm Daniela. Welcome to today's video, the third part in our tropical leaf series for slow stitching. This is where we complete our leaf and make it super realistic. Now at any point in this workshop, when you look at your leaf, you can decide you're done stitching. I'm going to show you all different ways to modify it too at the end, to make it a little more flexible and a little more realistic. It's a couple of simple stitches that will really give it some body. So let's get started. So now I've completed the stitching on both sides of my leaf. You can see it's really starting to come together. At any point in this process, you can stop stitching, but I really want to make this realistic. So with every stitch that I add additionally, it looks more realistic. So now it's time to take our bright green or standard green color. I'm using the Iris 967 here. And I divided the strands in half, so I have 3 strands of floss on my needle. Basically what I want to do here is emphasize the thickness here of this veining that I use the dark green leaf for. So the rest of my stitches will have fewer strands. They'll look a little more delicate. So now I just want to go in between these areas here and just start sewing these shapes, these rounded shapes. So for example, I'd come up here and I'd stitch this way. And on some areas I might do 2 lines, and on some I'll skip. And basically what I want to do is just create additional veining, but I don't want it to look like stripes. So to that effect, I'm not going to stitch the entire line. So for up here, I have this little space in between this darker green and this yellow. I'll stitch a few stitches. I'm going to start in the center here, right where my stem is, and just stitch a few along that line. Again, I'm going to keep in mind that my largest stitches are going to be close to the center of that stem. And then I'm just going to kind of haphazardly continue to stitch along that line, but I'm not stitching a straight line. I'm not stitching a line that matches all the stitches side by side. I'll skip some spots, and then I'll start adding more stitches. Now at this point, not only do we want to break up the line, like I'm doing here, which will show reflections and different paths that the veining takes, but at some point, I'm not only going to continue with the line, but I might add a stitch right side by side with that existing stitch. It'll look like a little thicker area. And you can see how previously I had just these lines of stitching, and now I'm incorporating a few little stitches just here and there of multiple stitches. And again, I want to bring some of my lines right to the end of that leaf. I could stitch just a few stitches over here, even though I didn't make any sketch, just to add a little bit of interest. Maybe I'll do 2, and then I'll make a couple side by side. And then I'll continue doing this. Now when you come to the area where your stem fabric, not your stitches, but your fabric is, I like to overlap that. By overlapping that, I stitch over it and connect it to my leaf fabric, and then it kind of just makes a nice little blend. You can even do a couple of stitches, keeping them side by side, very close up top as well. And I'll just continue stitching the rest of this side of the leaf. So now on this side of the leaf, I have my bright green stitched. I have a few areas where there are clear lines that go from the stem to the leaf, some areas where there's just little spots, and then some areas where there's thickness. So I'm starting to make variation in my stitching. I'll do the same thing on this side of the leaf with that green, but I'm just going to show you the rest of the process on the right side of the leaf here. I have this beautiful silvery green, the 3013, and now I'm going to incorporate that into my work. I'm going to start on just a few spots, and I'm going to make partial lines. So again, I want the longest part of that line to start from the stem, and I just want it to barely work its way out. Now I'm just using 2 strands of embroidery floss for this process. I want this to be just a subtle little variation. So I'll stitch a few stitches, kind of creating that line, following those lines. So they're somewhat parallel, but not completely. And then when I have just a few stitches where the eye can really start to lead it, you can see it's starting to change. I'm going to skip a spot, make a couple of stitches, and maybe add another row just very close to those 2 stitches. I can take a look at my work and decide, well, maybe I want to add another stitch on the other side as well. So it becomes a cluster. They're all facing the same direction, and they continue to lead the eye down this line here, like veining. Just going to start to stitch, offset that line. Again, following that formation that I made. And now I'll do this in a few other spots. Maybe I'll start over here. And I'll continue it with this color on the other side as well. After I do that, by adding my green and my silvery green to this side of the leaf, we'll come back in with our final color, the 907, which is a very bright green, and just add some highlights to the leaf. So I've made my stitches on both sides of the leaf. At this point, if you'd like to add more stitching, go right ahead. But I'm really pleased with the way this has come out. All my stitches follow this basic guide. There are some clusters, there are some perfectly stitched lines, there are some lines with spacing, but I love it. Overall, it's looking very organic and realistic, and that's what I was going for. For my last color here, the 907, this beautiful bright green, I took a single strand. And now I'm just going to go in on certain areas that I see. Like, for example, on the right-hand side here, I'll just add a little highlight up here, making just a little bit of an arc. We'll use little stitches because this color really stands out. So I'll just stitch a few stitches following that shape. On some level, I'm going to keep my largest stitches closest to the stem, just like I've been doing all along. And then my stitches will get smaller as they get out to the outer side of that leaf. But really what I'm doing now is just adding a little pop of color and some highlights with this beautiful green. So I'm liking the way that looks. I feel like I want to continue that line. I'll skip a spot. And the contrast between that single layer of floss, that single stitch, and the stitches next to it with the 6 strands or 4 strands are quite beautiful. Again, depending on the size leaf you make, you might find that there's a lot of variation in your thickness of stitches. If you make a small leaf though, all your stitches might be the same floss thickness. I'm going to skip a little area, come over here, just add a little cluster, and all my stitches will go in the same direction. I want to continue that idea of motion and life within the leaf. And I do that by making sure all my veins are going out from the center. And I'll just continue that all the way around the leaf. Any areas that I feel like I need to add a little more stitching, I'll do that. I can either do clusters, I can do lines, or I can do broken lines. So here I stitched the entire leaf everywhere that I wanted stitches. You can see the lines aren't all whole, some are. There's a lot of variation in color, and it's a very interesting effect. On the back, it's a little bit of a mess, but you can also see some stitches where I changed threads, where I have knots that were intentional, where my thread knotted where it wasn't intentional, but it's on the back. Now, you can leave it like this and use it in your work. I'm going to add it to one of my books, and I'm going to stitch it in so that the stem has a little bit of a curve to it. But that's the beauty of fabric, is you can bend this as you see fit. There's one more step I wanted to show you, and again, it's completely optional. As it is now, my leaf is completely flat. I'm going to take some of that thread. This happens to be the 561 because that's the one that matches my fabric so closely, and I just have 2 strands here on my needle and it's all knotted. You can do this along the sides to get a ruffle effect or down the center, and that's how I'm going to show you how I do it. So I'm just going to come up here kind of at the top of the leaf, not the very top, and I'm just stitching a parallel line to anchor my thread that matches the stitches that are already there. So those stitches that we put to act as a couching stitch or a fake couching stitch for the thread. And then I'm going to skip a space. So here's my first stitch. Now my second stitch is about 1 inch away. And I'm going to stitch again the same stitch, the parallel line, and now I'm going to pull it tight. And as you see, as I pull it tight, it kind of ruffles the leaf. I'm going to hold it tight on the back, skip another space, and do another stitch. I have my stitch, and now if I pull it tight again, I get a little bit more ruffle. If you want to maintain that ruffle, you just knot your stitch in each spot. But for now, I'm just making my stitches, and I'll go down the length of this leaf. It's the same stitch, just a simple stitch. And then when I'm happy with it, I'll just pull that thread, and I can play around with it. It's kind of like a basting stitch, and I get a realistic looking leaf shape. Now you can just do a running stitch. I kind of wanted to mask the thread shape, and so that's why I did this straight stitch. But it does allow me a little bit of give. You play around with it. Oh, and I like that. I like how it kind of forces the leaf into a very organic shape. So from here, I'm going to pull my leaf snug, make a knot with my thread a couple of times, right on the back. It's kind of a subtle effect, but it's one that I really like, and it adds a lot of life to my leaf. So I have my knot on the back. I can snip it. And now I have a very beautiful, organically shaped leaf. You can do the same thing along the edge here, and I'll just show you really quickly. I won't even knot my thread. Just make a basting stitch as if your thread were knotted. You're going to make little stitches, just going the length of the distance that you want to kind of furl your leaf. Now you'd make small stitches so that they be invisible. And I'll just show you very quickly. Now if my thread was knotted on the other end, so I've stitched down the length of this leaf, and I would take my knotted end and my unknotted end, and I would just pull together. And you can get a very tight ruffle, or you can loosen it to get whatever type of ruffle you like. Now, if this end were knotted, I would just decide the amount of ruffle I want here and knot this end. And then I would do it on this side as well. And that's why you get a little leaf. Because it's a live leaf, it's a little less ruffled, so maybe something like that would work for me there. So that's the end of that workshop. You can use this in your fabric books, depending on the size you make. You could trim down the stem. You could have a little bit of a pin. You can add a little pin to the backing and use this on your coat or in your purse. Or you can put it in a little pot if you make a few of these and have a little fake plant. So it's a very cute effect. Then I have my Textile Golden Pothos leaves. So that's the conclusion of the Fabric Tropical Leaf Workshop. I hope you've enjoyed it. I love this workshop. I have a few workshops throughout the year, and I'll link some of the others below, particularly the ones we've done in the past that I found very enjoyable. I hope you found this series enjoyable as well as the video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for joining me today.